Hello everyone. I am Dr. Aruna Nautiyal, Assistant Professor from the Department of Periodontics and Oral Implantology, and the topic for today's lecture is going to be periodontal regeneration. The contents of today's lecture are going to be covered under the following headings: a brief introduction, regeneration, repair, reattachment, new attachment, Melcher's concept, GTR, GBR, bone grafts, followed by conclusion. Now we are all aware of this beautiful creature called as the axolotl. So now the axolotl is also known as the master of regeneration. Why so? Because it has this inherent property of regenerating every part of its body that degenerates, whether it be its limb, its brain, or in fact even its spinal cord. It has that power to get that regenerative property. So what exactly is this regeneration? Now regeneration is the growth and differentiation of new cells and intercellular substances to form new tissues and parts. Now it takes place from the same type of tissues that has been destroyed or from its precursors. So basically regeneration means to get back the lost tissues. We have to know the basic difference between certain terms, that is regeneration, repair. So how does repair differ from regeneration? Now repair is nothing but healing by scar tissue. So it differs from regeneration as in it is not structurally and functionally restoring the tissue. It is merely covering up the wound or just healing by scar formation. When you talk about reattachment, so the name itself is saying reattachment, that means attachment again. So for example, when we do flap surgeries, we need to separate the flap from the periosteum. So when we do that, we are neatly incising the tissue, the epithelium and the connective tissue away from the bone surface. So in those cases wherein we are intentionally excising the tissue or incising the tissue and it is not being lost by periodontium, it is not being lost to periodontitis or any other pathology, that is when it is called as reattachment. So rejoining of the tissue after a clean cut or incision is called as reattachment. So we have the basic differences between regeneration, repair, that is healing by scar, and reattachment wherein it is not hampered by disease. There is another term known as new attachment. Now what exactly is new attachment? New attachment pertains to formation of new periodontal ligament to new cementum. So it is insertion of the new periodontal ligament into the new cementum, and this is where periodontal regeneration takes place. So basically there are four periodontal tissues. So we have four tissues in which the outermost is the epithelium. Inside the second layer would be your connective tissue. Then you have your alveolar bone, and last but not the least the periodontal ligament. So Melcher in 1976 gave a concept of compartmentalization. So he said any bone that is denuded of the soft and the hard tissues, it has the ability to regenerate by four cell compartments. Number 1 being the epithelium, number 2 the connective tissue, number 3 is the alveolar bone, and 4 is the periodontal ligament. So the cells from any of these four compartments could go and occupy the wound area, and depending on which cell is occupying the wound area or which cell is leading to the healing, you have different types of healing following the periodontal repair. So the first one, so as we said, the first compartment was the epithelium. So if it is the epithelium that occupies the wound space first, then what we call it as healing by long junctional epithelium. So when it is the second layer, second compartment, that is the connective tissue. So if it is the connective tissue that is occupying the wound surface first, so then we will end up with root resorption and connective tissue. So the third one, that is the third compartment was the alveolar bone. So if it is the alveolar bone cells which are going to occupy the compartment first, then we are going to land up with root resorption and ankylosis. Now the fourth one is where all the four compartments are participating together to lead to a new tissue formation. So that is exactly the formation of new attachment or periodontal regeneration. So wherein the epithelium forms in its place, connective tissue is forming in its place, alveolar bone followed by the periodontal ligament cells, and that is the ideal scenario which we as periodontists always aim for. So talking about GTR, or your guided tissue regeneration. So as the name itself is saying, guided tissue regeneration. Now in 1996 World War Shock, it was defined as the procedures attempting to regenerate the lost periodontal structures through the differential tissue responses. Now differential tissue responses, as in we already saw that there are these 4 compartments, there are differential tissues, different tissues participating in this wound healing. So we had our 4 tissues, again emphasizing that we had an epithelium, we had a connective tissue, we had a periodontal ligament and a alveolar bone. So all these 4 tissues are differentially participating in forming the healing process. So again, as per Malsh's concept of compartmentalization, why do we need to have a guided tissue regeneration? The main objectives of guided tissue regeneration therapy. Now it would be giving preference to the cells that repopulate the wound and have potential to regenerate the tissue, excluding the cells that may negatively interfere with tissue regeneration, also creating sufficient space to allow for formation of desired tissue. Now what does this mean? For example, if we were not to block the area, see, epithelium is supposedly the fastest growing tissue. So if we were not to block these epithelial cells from forming into the space of the alveolar bone and periodontal ligament, then the fastest growing cells, that is the epithelium cells, will encroach into the wound area, hence leading to formation of long junctional epithelium. But that is not what we are aiming for. So that is where we are going to exclude the epithelium and the connective tissue cells from occupying the bone surface, and in fact give preference to the alveolar bone and the periodontal ligament cells to form the new tissues. So what are the different types of barrier membranes that are available? So now depending on whether it is absorbable or it is non-absorbable. So the absorbable membranes are self-resorbable. So on their own they are metabolized by the body. But the non-absorbable ones, the barrier membranes, they always need a second surgery, a second stage surgery to remove the barrier membrane. Alright. So non-absorbable membranes, some of the examples are millipores, rubber dams, etc. And absorbable could be either natural sources or the synthetic sources. So if we talk about the natural sources, it could either be a connective tissue graft, it could be a periguide, a duro mater, etc. If we talk about the synthetic products among the absorbable, then we have either polylactic acid derivatives, that is the Guidor or Osmet, or we could have polyglycolic acid and polygalactic acid combination, which would be either resolute or vicryl mesh. So what is the basic difference between GTR and GBR? Now GTR stands for guided tissue regeneration, that we have already seen, wherein we are guiding the different tissues to form at their exact places to attain new attachment. GBR stands for guided bone regeneration. So in GTR technique, we are aiming for all the 4 tissues. In GBR technique, we are limiting ourselves to bone regeneration. Now when you compare technically, then GTR obviously is much more technique sensitive because it is an open wound area. So the sulcus is an open wound area which has a challenge of microbial ingress all the time. So that is why the sterility of that operative area is in question. Whereas in GBR, so GBR techniques are usually done wherein you have a resorbed ridge or you have a horizontal bone loss and you need to build up on that. So that's when we do GBR techniques or guided bone regeneration. So out of the 4 compartments, we are just limiting ourselves to one, the alveolar bone compartment. So it is a completely enclosed area there. Okay, now moving over to bone graft. So in periodontal regeneration, we have seen what are the different terminologies, we have seen the different differences in repair, we have seen the differences in new attachment, reattachment. Then we went over to see the basic difference between the GTR and GBR techniques. So next is the bone graft. So bone grafts basically are those tissues which are going to fill up for the spaces that has been lost to hard tissue, that has been lost to periodontitis or the pathogenesis. So a graft is a viable tissue that after removal from a donor site is implanted within the host tissue, which is then restored, repaired and regenerated. So what would be the objectives of a bone graft? So it acts as a space filler, thereby reducing the volume of bone clot. It stabilizes the clot to control hemorrhage, to act as a scaffold for growing granulation tissue, and it also prevents excessive contraction of the clot. So always remember, whenever there is a soft tissue, it will always follow the architecture of hard tissue. So if we were to replace the hard tissue, only then the soft tissue has a proper structure, otherwise the soft tissue collapses. So the basic indications of using a bone graft are deep intrabony defects associated with chronic inflammatory periodontal diseases, to increase the bone support for a tooth to restore functional ability, as in case of a abutment. So which are the different types of bone grafts now? So based on the origin or the source from where it is procured, there are different types of bone grafts. The first one being autograft. So auto, as the name itself says, auto means self. So autograft means the donor and the harvester are both the same. So it is a graft taken from one person and it is being used in the same individual. So when we say allograft means the tissues taken from the person of the same species, as in human to human. So it is, the graft has been obtained from a human being from the same species but a different individual. If it is the same person, then it is autograft, but if it is from a different individual, then it is allograft. Also there is one thing called as isograft. So isograft is when you are taking the graft from identical twins. So then there is xenograft. Xenograft means the grafts that are obtained from different species, so other than humans, whether it be porcine, it be bovine or any other sources. Next is alloblast. Alloblast are synthetic material, so they are not natural. So what is the mechanism of bone formation? Okay, we have grafted the tissue. Now what are the different ways in which the deficient bone is going to fill up, or the deficient bone is going to regenerate? So basically there are three major ways by which there is bone regeneration happening, or the mechanism of bone repair. So the first one is osteoconduction. So osteoconduction means the bone graft is basically forming a scaffold, or it is just holding space. So it is holding space while the cells from the inner lining of the defect are forming the bone. So that is what the mechanism is called as osteoconduction, wherein the bone graft is merely forming a scaffold. So next is osteoinduction. So as the name itself is suggesting, now this bone graft, other than having holding space, it goes one step ahead, because there are addition of certain growth factors like bone morphogenic proteins. So what happens is they have certain factors or inducible factors which will enhance the formation of new bone. So they are not merely a standby, they are not merely holding space or merely acting as a scaffold, but they have certain growth factors which are going to induce the osteoblast to form new bone. The last one is osteogenesis. Now osteogenesis is the gold standard by which we could attain periodontal regeneration or alveolar bone growth. So osteoregeneration or osteogenesis means formation of new bone. So in this, the bone graft itself has living tissue. So it has living cells which will form the bone. So this is the best amongst all of the bone graft materials, whether it be osteoconductive, osteoinductive. So osteogenesis is the best method of periodontal regeneration, and in osteogenesis it is only the autograft that has this inherent property. So if we were to classify these in a broader term, the osteogenic property is held only by the autograft. The osteoinductive property is wherein the graft has any growth factors, and the osteoconductive would merely mean a scaffold. So osteogenic, when we say, there are autografts. When we talk about osteoinductive, there are autografts and allografts. So osteoinductive means it is taken from the that means it has certain growth factors to induce the bone formation. So it could be either autograft or it could be allograft. When you talk about osteoconductive or merely holding space or acting as a scaffold, then we have the allografts, we have the xenografts, and we have the allografts. So that is the synthetic bone material. Then when we talk about the classification of bone grafts, it could either be bone derived or non-bone derived. So when we talk about bone derived, it could either be autogenous, allograft or xenograft. So autogenous means from the self, allograft means from a different individual but same species, and xenograft would mean from an entirely different species. So non-bone derived would be alloplast or synthetic bone materials. So what are the basic possibilities of bone grafting? So after we graft, it actively forms new bone, induces bone formation and creates a passive surface for bone formation. So to conclude, although complete periodontal regeneration is unpredictable with any regenerative therapy, but based on the available information, a significant reconstruction of human supporting periodontal tissue is possible in selected sites. So as periodontists, our main goal is to regenerate the tissue, not achieve repair, but to have a complete regeneration wherein each cell from where it has been deteriorated, it gets back to its own place. So new attachment with bone regeneration is the ideal outcome of any periodontal therapy. Thank you.